Hey y'all, I'm Rylan. Welcome to my channel. I think this is the very first book recommendations video that I have done all year so far, and I feel as though for myself personally, I'm setting the bar very high because today I'm going to be talking about books that I've read that have made me emotional. These are largely romances. We've got some contemporary mixed in as well, maybe like two contemporary or books that I would consider to be contemporary versus romance in the end because of the endings. But I'm excited to talk about these books with y'all. I will be talking about these books in order from like books that made me tear up a little bit to books that made me full on sob. And I think it's going to be a fun time. I have read hundreds and hundreds of books over the last couple of years, so this is not an extensive list of books that have made me cry, but this is a short list of books that I have read that I starkly remember crying during, and I just really want to share them with y'all. I've got some underrated books, I've got some hyped books, I've got some Kindle Unlimited books. Yeah, I've got a little bit of a variety here with different like romance sub genres or like tropes in these books, and I think it's going to be a fun video, and hopefully I don't start tearing up just talking about these books. But we're gonna go ahead and go in order from like a little bit of emotions, a little bit of tearing up to sobbing. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm gonna have to force myself to look at the backs of some of these books to remember what happens in them, but just know that every book that I'm talking about here made me emotional in some way or another. The first book that I have on this list is You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwake Emeze. I read this book a couple of years ago, back when it first came out. Back before it first came out, actually. I got an advanced copy of it and was super excited because this was a very highly anticipated read for me. This is a contemporary book about a woman named Faye who lost her husband, I think in a car accident a couple of years ago. They were high school sweethearts, had been married for a couple of years, and she's very much still sitting in that grief. So she goes on a trip to some tropical place and she meets this man, and we've got a little bit of an age gap romance going on, but the thing that got me with this book was the conversations and the themes of like grief and loss and healing, and the way that that looks different for everybody. And it was so beautiful watching Faye grow in this book, and really that's where I resonated with this book and what made me emotional about it. It has a happy ending, I'm very grateful for that, but the things that are talked about in this book, like the loss of her husband and grief, just really like hit me hard. And so I was tearing up a little bit throughout this book. I didn't full on cry, but there were definitely tears welling up in my eyes as I was reading this one. This was a 5-star read for me. I read it so slowly, but I wanted to kind of just like sit in it as I was making progress in it, and it still sticks with me. I have carried this book from Ohio to Tennessee to 2 different apartments to a different house. Like this book has been in like 4 different homes for me, and it's still here with me. I haven't reread it or anything like that, but this book did make me tear up and I would highly recommend it. 5 stars to this one. I will have content warnings in the description down below though. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I will have content warnings for all of these books in the description. So this is my first book, 5 stars, made me tear up, and yeah, that's this one. Some of these books that I have I do not own physically, so I just want to make sure that I go in the right order according to my notes app when I was tier ranking them in terms of like tears and crying. Next, I have Lotus by Jennifer Hartman. I read this book for a reading vlog for Bookmas last year where I did a taste test of Jennifer Hartman. I got to meet her back in November and I wanted to actually read her books after meeting her. So this is a romance about childhood best friends. Oliver was kidnapped and was held captive for like over a decade, and one day he is found and he doesn't really have a ton of memories. He's dealing with PTSD and like being back in the quote-unquote real world, but Sydney, who was his childhood best friend and next door neighbor, is still his neighbor, and they reunite their friendship. They navigate the chemistry that they have. Sydney wants to give him time to heal but Oliver has already fallen for her after just a couple of weeks being back next to her. And this very much is a book of hope and healing and navigating loss, but like finding joy again. And I thought that their relationship was very beautiful. Jennifer Hartman writes sad books. I have another book by her that I'll talk about in a little bit. I did tear up during this one. I didn't love it as much as the other book that I'll talk about in a few minutes, but I did get emotional. It's hard not to get emotional when you're dealing with such hard topics, but this one especially, with Oliver like having gone through so much, being held captive for little to no like real reason, and like watching him try to figure out who he is as a person while also developing feelings for his childhood best friend was just so beautiful and so sad at times. And I was like, just get together please. But Sydney was so respectful of like giving him time to heal and not wanting to rush things after all that he had been through. And I thought that their relationship was super beautiful and definitely healthy. I can't remember if this book has a third act breakup. I do not like them personally, but if this one does have it, it was for good reason, I think. I gave this book 4 stars, I'm pretty sure. It was really good. I did still like the author's other book that I've read a little bit better, but I do really like Lotus as well. Definitely some tears that were falling from my face in this one. Yeah, it was so good. Next, I have Absinthe by Winter Renshaw. This is a principal-student romance, kind of, because they don't actually do anything until after, like years later, I'm pretty sure. But it is about a girl whose name I cannot remember. I will look it up really fast because it has been a little while since I've read this book. You know, the synopsis is not super helpful. Here we go, but Stasia wrote a review for it. So, this is a book about Halston and Ford. Ford is a high school principal. Halston is a student there at his school, but she's also a cam girl. So they officially first meet online. Both of their profiles are anonymous, but they end up feeling this connection on this website that they both use. Ford very much does not want a relationship with anybody, but he can't help but like continue to go back to this person on this website that he's found. They talk about like intellectual things while also like being dirty, you know, a little bit. But the thing about this book that like was getting me emotional was the fact that we go through so much time in this book because Ford does not want to cross any boundaries, even though he kind of like does with the whole online thing. He doesn't know that it's his student at his school, but we follow them over a matter of years as they are pulled together, then pushed apart, then maybe it's pushed together and pulled apart. And I think the element of time as a huge aspect of their relationship is what got me feeling so emotional over this one. I was tearing up as I was reading it. I loved both characters so much and I wanted them to be happy, but life circumstances kept getting in the way that were keeping them from being truly happy. So I was super happy with that they did get their happy ending, but years passed to get there, and that was really hard for me, but I loved it. It started off a little bit taboo, but like grew into not taboo, I guess I would say. I did give this book 5 stars. My opinion is kind of unpopular on this one, I think, but I had a wonderful time with it. I only read it because I had gotten it as a special edition in my Belle book box, which is one of my romance subscriptions, and I think if I hadn't gotten this, I would never have read the book or heard of this author. So I'm so glad that Belle book box did this a couple of months back, or last year. It's probably over a year ago now, or almost a year ago now, because I would not have read this book otherwise, and I was definitely being torn up over it. So 5 stars to Absinthe. Next, I have a duet that I read for the Mending Hearts book club, which is a book club that I co-host. This was our November pick, and we read Eat You Alive and Eat Your Heart Out. These 2 books ended up being so much more emotional than I had anticipated. There's something about I don't want to spoil it. There's a very big subplot in this book that is announced like toward the end of this one and more explored in this book that hit me so hard and made me like, I was actually crying while reading this book. This is the first book where I was like actually like tears falling, I was sniffling. I would consider myself crying out of this list. We had lots of like tearing up and tears welling, but this was like the first crying that I've had in this list so far. But this is a college romance about Wolf and I don't know what her name is. Wolf and Fawn. Makes sense. It's college romance about Wolf and Fawn. At the beginning of the first book, Wolf blackmails Fawn into being his fake girlfriend, and they hate each other, but the hate quickly turns into something else. They explore a relationship. Fawn has gone through a lot with her father and her family and like loss, but there's this subplot that's introduced somewhere in the duet, and it has to do with a sickness. And I was actually like sitting in this blue chair that I'm sitting in right now. Y'all can't see that it's blue, or that I'm sitting in a chair. I was sitting in my blue chair reading this book and like actually crying, and I think I was doing that on live sprints. So I have record of it somewhere that I was like crying, physical tears. But just books that deal with like sickness, there's so much fear in that, because authors could like make a happy ending still, like make everything be okay, but that's also not always reality. So I was really nervous that this duet really was not going to end how I wanted it to end, but it is a happy ending. This is a romance with an AGA, so grateful for that. But man, I was just not expecting it to like be so emotional as I was reading it. It is pretty spicy. There's lots of hate, there's lots of enemies to lovers vibes, lots of anger, but man, I was crying. Especially during the second book, I was like, they're not gonna make it, and I was so nervous, but they did make it and we're doing great. But that's that duet by Eden O'Neill. Next I have The Nanny by Lana Ferguson, and really it's the end of this book that had me crying, which was during the third act breakup, because the tension and the angst and like the stakes were so high, and I was honestly wrecked. But this book is about Cassie, who is in grad school and used to have an OnlyFans account, but she ends up taking this job to be a nanny for a single father who's also a very popular chef. Turns out he used to be on her OnlyFans, and the chemistry is palpable from like the first couple of days that she's living in this house and like watching his daughter for him. And like the chemistry and the spice is like actually off the charts in this book. I was not expecting it to be so spicy when I read it, because I don't know, I just didn't expect that. And it was super spicy. But the third act breakup aspect, a lot of times for me, makes or breaks romance books. There have been a couple of romances that like immediately come to mind that I've read recently where the third act breakup has been for not great reasons in my opinion. It hasn't been justified, to me at least. And so for a lot of romances, the third act breakups make or break the book. And this one, I was literally pacing my room. It was probably almost 10 o'clock at night on a weekend, or maybe even like a Sunday night when I had to get up for work the next day, and I'm like pacing and crying as we read about Cassie and Aiden, and just like the fact that they so want to be together but something gets in the way, and like I was actually a hot mess. I don't own this book anymore, but I gave it 4.5 stars. It was so good. I absolutely loved it. I will just never forget the fact that I was just pacing up and down my room like crying as I was listening to their story, but loved it. I was definitely crying in this one. Next, I have Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman. This is about Cora and Dean, who are kidnapped one night together, and their kidnapper is a terrible man who forces them to do terrible things while watching the other person or doing them together, and eventually they escape. They make it out alive. But Dean has actually been engaged to Cora's older sister, and they've been together for years. And so as they get out of the situation that they were in, they both have to like navigate what it means to like live now, to live having gone through what they went through. And man, this book hurt so bad because like, you know that they have feelings for each other, but they don't allow themselves to feel it. Cora struggles a lot after getting out of the situation. Dean does as well, but I feel like he pretends that everything is all right, and Cora does as well, but she has a really hard time navigating her feelings and how her relationship with her sister changes because of her feelings and because of what Dean and Cora went through. And it's hard to read about because these characters are together but like also not together. Like they're so separate, they're so distanced even if they're in the same room, because they don't know how to get through what they've gone through. But there's this element in this book of healing and how you can heal together, but sometimes you need to heal separately first. And so these characters are separated. Man, it hurt. All these books hurt. But I was definitely tearing up during this one. What they went through was so despicable, but it was so beautiful to watch healing happen, and how healing isn't linear and it's not perfect. It's not just like one trend that you go on to heal. It takes so much time. It takes even more hurt to get to healing sometimes. And I just really appreciated how Jennifer Hartman like shared this story in a way that was respectful and beautiful and sad at the same time. I was crying during this one. I also read it for my taste test vlog when I read Jennifer Hartman books, but this one was definitely 5 stars for me. I just thought it was so good. It was so beautiful and so sad, and I loved it. All right, y'all, we got 5 books left here. Next, I've got Sinner by Sierra Simone. This is a kind of a taboo romance because our main character, Zenny, is about to become a nun. And she meets Sean, who is one of the Bell brothers. And I think she convinces him to make her last 30 days before like taking her final vows, like making them full of like things she'll never be able to experience once she becomes a nun. So there's lots of spice in this one. The thing that got me with this is the fact that we grow to know this family kind of during the first book in the series, which is called Priest, and there's a very big family change that happens in this book that had me sobbing during a live show. Back when you read these books for the Our Mending Hearts book club in January of 2023, I was sobbing on live sprints because of this one specific scene with Sean and his family and loss that they experience, and the way that it was written about. I mean, I was crying. I wonder if I can like find, I don't want to find it because that would just make me sad all over again, but there's one very specific scene, yeah, that I was like actually sobbing during, that filtered into like the rest of the book, and how Sean and Zenny's relationship played out. And man, so good. So good. I think that Sierra Simone personally writes religion in a very respectful way for like such taboo romances. I appreciate that. Absolutely, I do appreciate that. And how she can also like weave religious like themes and stuff like into spicy romances, but also like romances that deal with grief and loss of loved ones. And I'm just over here sobbing because of it. This is one of my favorite series of all times. I could read about Tyler, Sean, and Aiden all day long and their partners. I actually got to also meet Sierra Simone a couple of months ago when I met Jennifer Hartman, and it's just like so cool being able to like really put names and faces together when I get to meet these authors. I feel like it adds such a more personal aspect to the books that I read, so it was really cool to meet her. But anyway, love this book. Was sobbing for a bunch of pages because of something that happens in this one, and I'm so glad that Sean and Zenny got their happy ending by the end of the book. I just took out one of my books from this list because the more I was looking at it, the less I think I actually really cried during it. So 3 books left on this list. The next book that I have is The Revenge Pact by Ilsa Madden Mills. This is a football romance about River, who is a god on campus, and Anastasia, who, I mean, the back of the book says she's a nobody, so I'll just read that. She has a boyfriend throughout most of this book, which is the only thing that bugs me about this book, is that the relationship between River and Anastasia is very limited, I feel like, in the scope of romance, because she is with her annoying ex, or her annoying, I guess he's an ex by the end of the book, because she's with her annoying ex throughout like 60 or 70% of the book, I would say. I was sobbing during this book for like 60 pages because you've got this chemistry between Anastasia and River going on as she finally comes to realize that her boyfriend sucks, and that River has had feelings for her for forever, and like he's a good guy. But there's also this, again, a subplot of like family difficulty that bleeds into like the romance aspects and why they can't be together. And I read this book in 2022 before I moved to Nashville, and like when I say I was sobbing for like 60 pages of this book, like I mean I was just straight up sobbing in my bedroom for 60 pages of this book, because there's so much pain and fear and loss in this book in terms of like family grief, that it affects River's relationship with Anastasia for a very long time. And I just thought that this book was so good. It was so sad. I read 2 books by this author now and definitely want to keep reading more. I feel like I always put her on the back burner, but I truly loved this book. I don't read a ton of football romances. I've read 2, I think, total, like ever in my life, but it was so good. I'm just gonna go ahead and read the back of this book because it has been almost 2 years since I've read it, so I'll give you all a better synopsis just reading this. But it says that River Tate is a god on campus, the king of football, a tattooed bad boy with gunmetal eyes that see right through you. The only chink in his armor is her, the girl he pretends doesn't exist, the forbidden one with a shy smile and lavender hair. Anastasia Bailey is a nobody, the queen of nothing, an outsider with the face of an angel and a body made for sin. The only chink in her armor is him, her boyfriend's frat brother, the football player who hates her. But when Anastasia's life comes crashing down, River is the one who sweeps in and picks up the pieces. Torn between loyalty, lies, and secrets, he battles the temptation to take everything from her when they made their revenge pact. He can't tell her no because revenge or love is sweet, and once you get a taste, the craving never ends. So there is this idea of revenge in this book, and I think they kind of do like something to make respective like people jealous on campus, but he acts like he hates her when really he's been in love with her for like forever, or at least he's had like an unrequited crush on her and just doesn't want her to know about it. So she thinks that he hates her when really he really likes her, and she's with a terrible boy, he's not a man, and they end up having to work together, and River has to like pretend that he doesn't actually like Anastasia. But there's also, again, this element of family and grief that comes with that. So 5 stars to the Revenge Pact. I loved it. The last 2 books that I have here I would consider to be more contemporary. There is a romantic element in both of them, very much so, but the endings are very unconventional. So I hesitate to even call them just romances, because personally I consider a romance to be a book with a happily ever after. However, they are contemporaries. They have romantic themes and like very big romance plots within them, but I'm gonna go ahead and just say that these are contemporaries because I don't want to lead anybody astray. And these last 2 books, again, made me sob, and I knew they would because they both deal with terminal illnesses, and I think that's a really tricky topic to navigate in books in a way that is like true and accurate to real life. But I think that these authors did a great job with that, and most likely did a ton of research going into it, or even experienced in some way themselves like what it's like to go through these things. But the first book that I have here is Underneath the Sycamore Tree by B. Celeste. This is about Emery, whose twin sister passed away with this disease, and Emery also has it, and she knows that she's going to die soon. She moves in with her dad. Her parents are divorced, and her dad is married to a woman who has a son whose name is Caden. So they're step siblings, I guess. So she moves into this house with them, and Caden does not seem to like her very much. But as they spend more time together, nobody knows that she's sick either. So Caden has no idea that she's dying. But as they spend more time together, they develop a relationship that turns into love. But Emery knows that she cannot have the happy ending that she wishes that they could have. And so from the very beginning, like, I mean, I anticipated that this is not gonna have a happy ending, and I hate that it doesn't, but also like I totally believe how like real that is, because you don't always get a happy ending. And so anyway, I was sobbing throughout this one, especially at the very end as she's like last moments with him. Oh my gosh, I just want to like cry thinking about it. You would think like it's like taboo because like step siblings, but it's really not. The cover is so deceiving because it's so beautiful and like, I don't know, like leaves falling, it's happy, but This book is actually so sad. It's so hard. I was crying. The epilogue, or like the last chapter of this book, made me so mad because Caden fell in love. He grew as a person, but because of the loss that he goes through, he becomes a shell of the man that he definitely grew into being with Emery. So that made me really sad to, like, it broke my heart to read about that. And it just made me want to cry even more, and I did cry even more. I, again, was reading this book on live sprints. I finished it on live sprints, and Stasia was just laughing at me because she didn't cry while reading this book, but I was sobbing. I just, you know, I get so attached to my characters that I read about. Yeah, when they hurt, I hurt. And it's tough, but that's this book. I actually also got to meet B Celeste. She signed my book after I read it, and she talked about my tabs. And I was like, I love you. I think this says, anyway, sorry, I'm trying to like read her handwriting. She wrote a little note to me though, and yeah, this book is so sad, but I would recommend it. 5 stars to that one. And the final book that I have is one that I actually own like 4 copies of, and that is 1,000 Boy Kisses by Tilly Cole. This is a young adult contemporary about Poppy and Rune, who grew up as next door neighbors. Rune has to move back to Germany for a couple of years for his dad's work, and he is so mad about it. He ends up becoming this boy who is angry at the world, who's angry at his family, who hates what his parents have done to him because they took him away from Poppy, who, best friend, first love, all that jazz. When his family finally moves back to the States, into the same house that they lived in before, he is just a shell of a person. When Rune comes back from Germany, they move in the same house that they lived in before. When he was growing up, there's something about Poppy that is different. And when he finds out the truth, he has to navigate what reality is going to look like for him and his best friend, but mostly he's gonna have to figure out like how to show Poppy the strongest of loves for as long as they can be together, I guess is the best way to put it. I don't want to spoil the book. I feel like for this one it's best to go in not knowing too much. Just anticipate tears, like all the tears. This book I first read in, my guess is like October, November of 2021, because I'm picturing my dorm room that I was sitting in when I was sobbing while reading this book. 2021. It's been 2.5 years since I first read it. I've read it a second time since then. I do have a reading vlog where I read this book again and let it break me once more. But I was sobbing so loud and so hard that like I couldn't catch my breath, and I was like, my roommates are so going to be able to hear me in like my little unit that I was in. But this book wrecked me. I was in so much physical pain that I didn't know when I was going to be recovered from it. I think this book put me into a reading slump for a little while because I cried so hard and yearned so much for more that I could not handle for a little while what it meant to not have more. So this is a young adult book, of course. It's really, really sad though. That's all I'll say. I'm gonna reread this book soon. I need to reread it this year for sure because Tilly Cole is releasing a sequel to this book about one of Poppy's sisters, I think. And I want to see what ends up happening with these families and these characters in the second book. But just so good. I will never look at like a cherry blossom tree and be the same again. Like even pictures online, I'm like, oh, sad, tears. There's no spice in this one. There's one like almost like scene, but it's fade to black because it is young adult. But this book really showed me like the power that young love can have. I feel that so often people hate on like high school sweethearts, young love, yada yada yada, and I can definitely be a hater too a lot of times. But yes, this is fiction, but there's just something about it that like really hit home for me in terms of like the power that love can have. It doesn't really matter if you're, you know, 17 or 27 or 37, like man, like love can be so strong. And maybe that's just me wishing that this fictional book was real to an extent in terms of like that theme of love. But this will forever remain one of my all-time favorite books, even though it breaks me a little bit more every time I read it. But that is my final book recommendation for sad books. I feel kind of silly saying that because why would I recommend books that would make you cry? But I personally love getting emotional when I read books. I feel as though getting emotional just really, I say this all the time, just really showcases how powerful language and words can be. And so by reading these books, I was able to feel something, which is great because I don't always feel a lot in like regular real life stuff. I'm pretty like just, you know, not a very emotional person in real life, but these are all books that I just really connect with and got emotional during, whether it's by tearing up or like full-on sobbing, like racking sobs in my dorm room in college. I just cannot help but fall in love with these books, even if they are so hard to read at times. Again, that's the power of writing, the power of the written word, and I would so recommend checking one or all of these books out if you're looking to feel some sort of emotion while reading them, some sort of sad emotion while reading them, because these are all books that have sad elements in them. Most of them have happy endings, which is great. Not all of them do though, so keep that in mind when you're picking these ones out. But I do think that these books are all very beautiful, and I would so recommend checking them out. If you have read any sad books or books that made you emotional that you want to recommend to me, please feel free to do so. I get in the mood to cry in my books all the time, and I don't always do that, and I wish I cried like full on tears. So if you have any crying book recommendations, feel free to comment down below and let me know what they are, because I would love to check them out. But that is all that I have for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.